All right, students, so here we are. We're going to dig back into some questions of jamming skills, and we're going to pick back up from what we covered in the beginner section. We learned the basics, including just how a jam is set up. We talked a little bit about jam leadership. We talked about choosing a song for a jam. We talked about learning a hum through for helping teach your fellow jammers what song you're about to do. We learned about kickoff and counting off songs. So we're going to get into now questions of what do you do once your song starts, and so that includes questions of typical song forms, calling solos, the verbal cues, the body language that all makes that work, and these are elements of what's called jam protocol, meaning there's kind of common way that jams tend to work, and there's not hard, fast rules, but just common tendencies. And that's one of the cool things about bluegrass jamming is that there are enough common assumptions wherever you go about how this stuff works that you can kind of get up and running and make some music with strangers and make some new friends. Anyhow, so there's protocol, meaning just kind of how things tend to unfold, how stuff gets communicated, and then there's etiquette, and etiquette and protocol kind of are intermeshed in a lot of ways, but. Before we dive in talking about leading a song, once the song starts, I do want to kind of go over some elements of etiquette that are really important to anyone who wants to participate in a jam, regardless whether you're a singer or instrumentalist or both. Now, the three big things, as far as your musical interactions, are listening, blending, and dynamics. So let's start with listening and dynamics, kind of both at the same time. It's really important when you go to a jam to play in an appropriate volume. Jams have a way of getting really loud and sort of cacophonous. Like especially you get a bunch of instruments. You get 3 or 4 guitar players, 8 banjos, 3 or 4 mandolins. Those sounds just really gang up on one another, and it can make it hard to hear yourself and hear the people you're playing with, and also the acoustics of the room that you're jamming in. It might be a factor, or if you're at a festival and outside, you might be hearing other jams in the next campsite over or whatever. But anyhow, the relative volume of jams is a really important issue. Now, the big rule of thumb is that if you can't hear a soloist clearly, you need to play more quietly. So. And the same goes for a singer. If you can't hear a singer singing, some singers are very loud, some are pretty quiet, and wherever they are, you've got to adjust. Now, just talking a little bit about the various bluegrass instruments, you got fiddles and banjos tend to be quite loud instruments. They project. Guitars tend to be quieter instruments, certainly when it's comes to playing leads. So if there's a guitar player taking a break, everyone's probably going to need to come down. Or if some mandolins, depending on the instrument, might be sort of quiet instruments, and whatever volume they're at, you just got to come down under the soloist. So that you might be into it. You might have had a couple beers. You might be sort of raging, but you got to learn how to kind of tread lightly and balance your volume. So along with volume, one thing to consider, and this is for instrumentalists, is you got to consider the directionality of your instruments. Certain instruments, like an F-style mandolin and a banjo in particular, those instruments are very directional, meaning the majority of the sound just goes straight out. So what that means is that if you're playing a mandolin or a banjo and you're above the instrument, you're not going to hear that as loud as someone who's standing in front of the instrument is going to hear it. Now, guitars and some mandolins tend to kind of radiate sound more, so it might be, again, it depends on the instrument, but guitar players are likely to hear a little bit more of themselves than banjo and mandolin. But you've got to, if you walk around a bluegrass jam, and if you kind of see a banjo or a mandolin player with a loud instrument playing, kind of walk around beside or behind them and notice how much quieter it sounds to you than if you're right in front of them. It can be pretty dramatic. So if you're one of the people playing those instruments, be aware of how much more sound is going out in front. Now, if you're in a jam and you're feeling annoyed by some player who's just playing too loud, just keep in mind that they might not realize how loud they are to you. Just standing above the instrument, they might think that they're at a perfectly balanced volume. So you don't have to get too salty. You got to be understanding. They might just not know how loud they are. So.